My son shouted in front of everyone, "You'll never be half the woman my mother-in-law is." I stood calmly. "Will she cover your $1 million debts then? Because I'm not sending you any more money." His wife froze. "What debt? What money? We haven't received a cent from you." He started to get nervous. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this all started, because trust me, you need the full picture to understand just how satisfying that moment was. I'm Margaret Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie. At 63, I thought I'd seen it all. Raised my son David alone after his father walked out when the boy was 8. Worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat and somehow managed to put him through college. I was proud of what we'd built together, even if it wasn't fancy. But apparently David had different ideas about our story. It was a Tuesday evening in March when he first showed up at my small apartment in Queens, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He'd been living in Manhattan for 5 years by then, claiming he was building his empire in some vague financial venture he never quite explained. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, not even bothering to hug me hello. He sat on my second-hand couch like he was afraid it might stain his expensive clothes. "Of course, sweetheart. You want some coffee? This isn't a social visit." His tone was clipped, professional. "I need you to understand something. When I bring Jessica around to meet you, you cannot mention anything about how we lived when I was growing up." Jessica, the girlfriend he'd mentioned exactly twice in passing. "What do you mean, how we lived? We had a good life, David." His laugh was bitter. "Mom, we were poor, welfare poor, food stamp poor. She doesn't need to know that." The words hit me like a slap. We'd struggled, yes, but we'd never gone hungry. I'd made sure of that. "We were not on welfare, David Sullivan. I worked 3 minimum wage jobs, I know. But she's from money, real money. Her family owns Thornton Industries. They're worth hundreds of millions." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "This is my chance, Mom. My one shot at the kind of life I deserve." I stared at my son, seeing a stranger. "The kind of life you deserve? You know what I mean. Not this." He gestured around my modest apartment dismissively. "I've worked too hard to let our past ruin my future." That's when I realized David had been ashamed of me for years, maybe his whole adult life. The phone calls that became less frequent, the holidays he suddenly had work obligations for, the way he never invited me to visit his apartment. "When do I get to meet this Jessica?" I asked quietly. "Soon. And Mom, please just try to blend in." After he left, I sat in my kitchen wondering when exactly I'd become something my own son needed to hide. The irony wasn't lost on me that David wanted to erase our past, especially considering how hard I'd fought to give him a decent childhood after his father decided we weren't worth sticking around for. Robert Sullivan was one of those charming men who promise you the world but can't even handle the responsibility of taking out the trash. We were 25 when David was born, living in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, both of us working entry-level jobs and dreaming of something better. "We're going to give this kid everything, Maggie," Robert used to say, holding baby David against his chest. Everything we never had. What David never had was consistency. Robert would get inspired by some get-rich-quick scheme, selling insurance, multi-level marketing, day trading with money we didn't have. Each failure left us deeper in debt, and Robert more bitter. The final straw came when David was 8. Robert had convinced me to let him use our rent money for a sure-thing stock tip. When that money evaporated overnight, leaving us facing eviction, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "I can't do this anymore, Maggie. This family is holding me back." He packed a single suitcase and left. No forwarding address, no child support, no explanation for David about why Daddy suddenly wasn't coming home. That first year alone was the hardest of my life. I waitressed at a diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., cleaned offices from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., and watched Mrs. Chen's twin boys in exchange for her watching David after school. I slept maybe 4 hours a night and lived on coffee and determination. But we made it work. David never missed a meal, never showed up to school in dirty clothes, never knew how many nights I lay awake calculating whether we had enough money for his school supplies or if I needed to pick up extra shifts. I thought I was raising him to be grateful for what we had, to understand the value of hard work. Instead, apparently, I was creating a man who'd spend his adult life trying to pretend none of it ever happened. The worst part? I'd been proud of him. When he graduated college, the first Sullivan to do so, I cried through the entire ceremony. When he got his first real job at a financial firm, I bragged to anyone who'd listen. "My son works on Wall Street," I'd tell the other waitresses at the diner where I was still working doubles to pay off the student loans I'd co-signed. I'd sacrificed everything so he could have opportunities I never had. Now he was using those opportunities to climb so high he couldn't even see me anymore. 2 weeks after David's visit, he called to say Jessica wanted to meet me for lunch. Somewhere casual but nice, he specified. Translation: nice enough to impress his girlfriend, casual enough that my presence wouldn't seem too out of place. "And Mom? Maybe wear that blue dress, the one from Macy's." The one he'd bought me for his college graduation 6 years earlier. The only dress I owned that didn't come from a discount store. I agreed to lunch, but I was already wondering what other parts of myself I'd need to hide. The restaurant David chose was the kind of place where the waiters wear black ties and the salads cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the blue dress and the anxiety that comes with knowing you're about to be judged. Jessica Thornton was everything I'd expected and nothing like I'd hoped. Blonde, polished, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from good genetics and expensive maintenance. She was also, surprisingly, genuinely sweet. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm so excited to finally meet you. David talks about you all the time." I shot a glance at David, who was studying the menu like it contained state secrets. "All good things, I hope." "Oh, yes. He says you're incredibly strong and independent. He clearly gets his work ethic from you." Work ethic. That was David's sanitized version of, "My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us from being homeless." Lunch went better than I'd expected. Jessica asked about my work. I told her I was between positions, which was technically true since I'd just retired from the diner. She asked about David's childhood. I shared carefully edited stories about Little League games and school plays, leaving out the parts about hand-me-down uniforms and me falling asleep in the bleachers after pulling double shifts. David relaxed as the meal progressed, probably relieved that I wasn't regaling his girlfriend with tales of government cheese and utility shut-off notices. "You raised an amazing man," Jessica said warmly as we waited for the check. "I can't wait for you to meet my parents. They're going to love you." That's when David's shoulders tensed again. Meet the parents, the rich parents, the parents who owned companies instead of working for them. After Jessica excused herself to the restroom, David leaned across the table. "You did great, Mom. Really great. She likes you. She's a lovely girl, David. She seems to genuinely care about you." "She does. And her family. They could really help with my career. Her father sits on the board of 3 major investment firms." There it was. The real reason David was so worried about making a good impression. Jessica wasn't just a girlfriend. She was a business opportunity. "Just remember what we talked about," he added quietly. "About our past staying in the past. And Jessica understands you're very private. I've explained that you prefer to keep your financial affairs discreet, especially since you've had some bad experiences with people trying to take advantage of your success." I stared at him. Even his explanations for my behavior were lies. "She's actually impressed by how independent you are," he continued. "Most wealthy parents are constantly inserting themselves into their children's lives, offering unsolicited advice about investments and business decisions. She respects that you've raised me to be self-sufficient." Self-sufficient. While I was paying his debts every month, I wanted to ask him what was so shameful about a mother who'd loved him enough to sacrifice everything. Instead, I nodded and smiled, playing my part in his carefully constructed narrative. But as I watched Jessica return from the restroom, laughing at something David whispered to her, I couldn't help wondering what would happen when she inevitably discovered the truth. Because in my experience, lies have a way of unraveling at the worst possible moment, and David had been spinning quite a web of lies, some of which I was only beginning to understand. Over the next few months, their relationship moved quickly. David started bringing Jessica to family events, or rather the sanitized version of family events he'd created. Dinners at expensive restaurants where I was introduced as a retired professional, rather than a woman who spent 30 years serving other people food. I played along because I loved my son and wanted him to be happy. But each lie felt like another brick in the wall he was building between us. What I didn't know then was that David's web of deception went far beyond just hiding our humble beginnings. The phone call that changed everything came on a Thursday night in November, 3 years after David had started his financial services career. I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang at 11:30 p.m. "Mom, I need help." David's voice was shaky, panicked. "I need help, and I need you to not ask questions." My blood went cold. "David, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt, but I'm in trouble. Big trouble. I need $50,000. $50,000. I made $30,000 a year at my best-paying job. Sweetheart, I don't have that kind of money. What's this about?" "Mom, please. I can't explain everything right now, but there are people, bad people, and they're going to hurt me if I don't pay them by Friday." My son was crying. My 30-year-old son was sobbing into the phone like he was 8 years old again and had scraped his knee. "David, you need to call the police if someone's threatening you." "I can't. Mom, you don't understand. I did something. I made some bad investments with money that wasn't really mine to invest. It was supposed to be temporary, just until this deal came through, but everything went wrong. The pieces started falling into place. The expensive clothes, the Manhattan apartment, the confident talk about building his empire. None of it was real. How much do you owe total?" Silence. Then, barely a whisper. "About $150,000. $150,000. Still more money than I'd made in 5 years of working multiple jobs." "David, how did you—" "It was a system, Mom. This guy at work showed me how it worked. We'd borrow from client accounts, invest in sure things, make a profit, pay back the original amount plus interest. Everyone wins. That's called embezzlement, David. It's not like that. We were helping people grow their investments. But this last deal, the one that was supposed to pay for everything, it didn't just fail, it collapsed. And now the clients want their money back, and the people I borrowed from to cover the difference, they're not patient people." I sat down heavily on my bed. My son was a thief who was about to get his legs broken by loan sharks. "Give me their number," I said finally. "Mom, no, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm telling. Give me their number, and then you're going to tell me exactly how we fix this." The next morning, I was sitting in First National Bank talking to a loan officer about leveraging my excellent credit history, built over decades of never missing a payment on my small house, for a home equity loan. By noon, I was at Atlantic Trust discussing a personal loan secured by my retirement account and 30-year employment history with the same diner. By closing time, I was at Community Savings, signing papers for a credit line that would help bridge the gap. It took me 3 banks, careful negotiation, and every penny of my savings, but I managed to scrape together enough money to save my son's life. The monthly payments would eat up 40% of my income, but David promised he'd help pay them back once he got his feet under him. "You saved me, Mom," he said, hugging me tightly when I handed him the cashier's checks. "I'm never going to forget this. I'm going to make this right." That was 3 years ago. In all that time, David had made exactly 4 payments toward those loans. 4 payments out of 36, $350 a month, while he somehow maintained his expensive Manhattan lifestyle on his legitimate salary from the investment firm. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that while I was selling everything I owned and mortgaging my future to save him, David was telling Jessica and her wealthy family that he was a successful investment advisor who'd never needed anyone's help. The lies were getting bigger, and the house of cards was getting shakier. I should have known it was all going to come crashing down eventually. David's engagement announcement came via text message. Not a phone call, not a visit, not even a proper conversation. Just, "Jessica said yes. Engagement party next month. We'll send details." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decide if I was more hurt by the impersonal delivery or by the realization that I was clearly an afterthought in my son's major life moments. The details, when they arrived, were for a cocktail party at Jessica's parents' country club. "Cocktail attire suggested," the invitation read. I'd been to exactly 0 cocktail parties in my 63 years. I called David to congratulate him properly and also to ask the question that had been nagging at me since I received the invitation. "Sweetheart, I'm so happy for you both. Jessica is wonderful." "Thanks, Mom." She really is. I'm lucky. I was wondering about the engagement party. Will this be the first time you're introducing me to her parents as family? A pause. Mom, about that. I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say no. My stomach dropped. What is it, David? Jessica's family they're different from us. They move in circles where appearances matter a lot. Business is done based on relationships and impressions. David, just say what you need to say. I need you to let them think we're more financially comfortable than we actually are. You want me to lie about our situation. I want you to be vague about your background. Don't volunteer information about the jobs you had or how we lived. Let them draw their own conclusions. I thought about those loan payments I'd been making faithfully every month while living on beans and rice so David could keep his secret shame hidden from his fiancé's family. And if they ask direct questions, just redirect. Talk about my success instead, or ask them questions about their business. Rich people love talking about their accomplishments. Rich people. As if he weren't talking about his future in-laws, people who were about to become family. David, what happens when Jessica finds out the truth? About your debts? About what I sacrificed to save you? She's not going to find out unless you tell her, Mom. And why would you do that? It would destroy everything we've built together. Everything we've built. He meant everything he'd built on lies. I'll do my best to be discreet, I said finally. But I won't outright lie to these people. That's all I'm asking. Just don't volunteer information that might make things complicated. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking around my modest apartment. The furniture I'd bought secondhand. The dishes I'd collected with grocery store points. The stack of bills on the counter that included those loan payments for David's mistake. I'd spent 3 years paying for my son's crimes while he courted a woman whose family thought he was financially successful. I'd kept his secret, protected his reputation, and enabled his deception. And now he wanted me to actively participate in lying to the woman he claimed to love. The engagement party was in 2 weeks. I needed to find something appropriate to wear, something that wouldn't embarrass David or raise questions about our financial comfort. I ended up spending $200 I couldn't afford on a simple black dress and matching shoes. Money that could have gone toward groceries or utilities, or the medical bills from my dental work last month. But I did it because I loved my son, and because I still believed that somewhere under all these lies was the little boy who used to thank me for every meal and tell me I was the strongest person in the world. I was about to discover just how wrong I was about who my son had become. The Thornton family's country club was the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and waiters who glided silently between guests carrying champagne on silver trays. I'd arrived precisely on time, wearing my new dress and feeling like a fraud. Jessica spotted me immediately and rushed over, radiant in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Mrs. Sullivan, you look absolutely beautiful. Come meet everyone." She took my arm and led me toward a group of elegantly dressed people who were clearly the inner circle. Victoria Thornton, Jessica's mother, was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, blonde, and carrying herself with the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. "Mother, this is David's mom, Margaret." Victoria's smile was polished but warm. "Margaret, how wonderful to finally meet you. Jessica speaks of you so highly, and we're thrilled about the engagement. Thank you. You have a beautiful daughter. David's very lucky." "And what is it you do, Margaret?" Victoria asked, the question all mothers ask when sizing up their children's significant others' families. This was the moment David had coached me for. "Be vague," he'd said. "Let them draw their own conclusions." "I'm recently retired," I said carefully. "I spent most of my career in customer service and management." Technically true. Waiting tables is customer service, and juggling 3 jobs requires serious management skills. Victoria nodded approvingly. "It's so smart to retire while you're young enough to enjoy it. What are your plans? Travel? Hobbies?" Before I could answer, David appeared at my elbow with Jessica's father, Charles Thornton. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 55, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from generational wealth. "Dad, this is my mother, Margaret Sullivan." Charles shook my hand firmly. "Pleasure to meet you, Margaret. David's told us so much about you." I glanced at David, wondering what exactly he'd shared. All good things, I hope. Of course. He says you're incredibly independent and self-sufficient. Raised him to be the same way. Self-sufficient. Another sanitized version of struggled to make ends meet for 30 years. The conversation flowed easier than I'd expected. Victoria talked about the wedding plans. Charles asked about my thoughts on the economy, and I found myself almost enjoying the evening. These were nice people, despite their wealth. They clearly loved Jessica and seemed to genuinely like David. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I was getting a glass of water from the bar when I heard David's voice behind me, talking to a group of Jessica's cousins and family friends. The secret is diversification, he was saying. My portfolio has been consistently outperforming the market for 3 years running. Conservative investments, blue-chip stocks, nothing too risky. I turned slightly, curious about this version of David's financial philosophy. That's impressive, one of the men said. Especially in this market. You must have started with substantial capital to see those kinds of returns. David laughed casually. Well, I've been fortunate. Family money gave me a head start, and I've been building on that foundation ever since. Family money. I nearly dropped my water glass. Smart parents, another man commented. Setting their kids up for success from the beginning? Absolutely. My mother made some very shrewd investments over the years. Real estate mostly. She's always had a good eye for potential. I stood frozen at the bar, listening to my son describe a life that never existed. In David's version of reality, I wasn't a working-class single mother who'd mortgaged her future to save him from loan sharks. I was a savvy investor who'd built wealth over time and passed it down to him. The lies weren't just about hiding our past anymore. He was actively rewriting history, making himself the beneficiary of generational wealth instead of the son of a woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. But the worst part was still to come. As I walked back toward Jessica and Victoria, I heard David's voice again, louder now, emboldened by champagne and the admiring attention of his audience. The best part is, I'll never have to worry about taking care of her in her old age. She's more financially secure than I am. The room felt like it was spinning. My son was telling people that I was wealthy, that I didn't need his help, that he'd never have to support me. Meanwhile, I was living on Social Security and those part-time jobs because 60% of my income went to paying off the debts I'd incurred to save his life. I made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, smiling and nodding and playing the part of the mysterious, well-off mother. But inside, I was calculating exactly how much David's lies had cost me, $350 every month for 3 years, and wondering what price I'd have to pay for his happily ever after. The dinner invitation came 2 weeks later. Not just any dinner, a formal family dinner at the Thornton estate to properly welcome Margaret into our family circle before the wedding planning kicked into high gear. David called me 3 times that week with increasingly specific instructions. Arrive at 7 sharp. Wear something elegant but understated. Don't mention specific neighborhoods where we'd lived. Don't talk about government assistance programs, even in abstract terms. And Mom? Victoria mentioned she might ask about your investment strategies since I told them you were financially savvy. Just keep it general. David, I've never made an investment in my life except for my little house. You don't need to lie. Just redirect the conversation. Ask her about her business instead. The Thornton estate was intimidating even by wealthy standards. A circular driveway led to a mansion that belonged in architectural magazines, surrounded by gardens that probably required a full-time staff. Victoria greeted me at the door herself, looking effortlessly elegant in a cream silk blouse and pearls. Margaret, how lovely to see you again. Come in, Charles is mixing cocktails. The dining room could have seated 20 people comfortably. Tonight, it was set for 6. The Thorntons, David and Jessica, and me. I'd never eaten off china that thin or used silverware that heavy. Dinner started smoothly enough. Charles talked about his latest business acquisition. Victoria shared updates about Jessica's sister who was studying abroad, and David was the charming, successful son-in-law-to-be. Then Victoria turned to me with genuine interest. Margaret, I have to ask. David mentioned you have quite the head for investments. I'm always looking for fresh perspectives. What's your philosophy on portfolio diversification? I felt David's eyes burning into me from across the table. This was exactly the scenario he'd been dreading. "Oh, I'm much more conservative than David makes me sound," I said carefully. "I believe in the basics. Pay your bills. Save what you can. Don't spend money you don't have." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Sound principles. And David says you've been quite successful with real estate." Real estate. My one small house that I'd nearly lost to pay his debts. "I've been fortunate," I said, which wasn't technically a lie. "Modest as always," David interjected with a nervous laugh. "Mom's portfolio has been outperforming mine for years, but she won't admit it." That's when Charles chimed in with the comment that started everything unraveling. "It's refreshing to meet parents who've built something substantial to pass down. So many young people today expect success without the foundation." "Actually," I said slowly, "I think young people today face challenges our generation couldn't imagine. David's success is entirely his own achievement." The room fell silent. David's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Really?" Victoria seemed genuinely surprised. The way David talks about growing up, I assumed he'd had advantages. Private schools, family connections, and finance. I looked at my son, this stranger who'd rewritten our entire history to impress his in-laws. "David went to public school," I said quietly. "We didn't have money for private education." "Mom!" David's voice carried a warning. But something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the months of enabling his lies. Maybe it was the elegant dining room that reminded me how different our worlds really were. Or maybe it was just 30 years of putting his needs before my own dignity. "We lived in a small apartment in Queens," I continued. "I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after his father left. David earned every scholarship, every opportunity, every success through his own hard work." Jessica was staring at David now, confusion clear on her face. Charles and Victoria exchanged glances. "That's even more impressive," Victoria said diplomatically. "Self-made success is the most meaningful kind." David forced a smile. "Mom likes to downplay how well we actually lived. She's always been modest about our family's resources." "Modest?" The word escaped before I could stop it. "David, there's nothing modest about the truth. We were working class. You know that. Mom, please." But I was done. Done with the lies, done with protecting his carefully constructed image, done with pretending our struggle was something shameful. "Your son is an incredible man," I said to Victoria and Charles. "He graduated college on academic scholarships while working part-time jobs. He built his career from nothing, with no family connections or inherited advantages. You should be proud to have him in your family." The silence stretched until Jessica finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. "David, is that true? About growing up with financial struggles?" David's face had gone pale. "Jessica, it's complicated." "It's not complicated at all," I said. "Sometimes good people face hard times, and sometimes they overcome them. That's David's real story, and it's a much better story than the one he's been telling." That's when David made the mistake that would cost him everything. David's face flushed red as he set down his fork with deliberate precision. "You know what, Mom? I think you've said enough for one evening." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and it triggered something I'd been suppressing for 3 years. "Have I? Because I feel like I'm just getting started." "Margaret," Victoria said gently, clearly sensing the tension, "perhaps we should—" "You'll never be half the woman my mother-in-law is," David exploded, pointing at me across the formal dining table. "Victoria built an empire from nothing. She understands what real success looks like, not this martyrdom complex you've been carrying around for 30 years. The words hit like a physical blow, but instead of crumbling, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was who my son really was. Not the grateful child I'd raised, not the successful businessman he pretended to be, but an entitled, bitter man who'd rather destroy his mother than face the truth about himself. I stood up calmly, setting my napkin beside my plate. "You're absolutely right, David. Victoria is an impressive woman. She built something real with her own hands and intelligence." I turned to look directly at Victoria. "Will she be covering your $150,000 debts then? Because I'm not sending you any more money." The room went dead silent. Jessica's face went white. "What debt?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "What money? We haven't received a cent from you." David started to sweat visibly. "Mom, don't. 3 years ago, your fiancé stole money from his client's investment accounts. $150,000. When the loan sharks came calling, threatening to break his legs, I mortgaged my house and emptied my retirement account to save him. Jessica turned to stare at David, who was now gripping the edge of the table. I've been making payments on those loans ever since. $350 every month for 36 months. I've got the bank statements, if anyone's curious. Charles cleared his throat. Margaret, surely you don't mean... I mean exactly what I said. David embezzled money, I bailed him out, and I've been paying for his crimes ever since, while he's been playing the role of successful investment advisor on his legitimate salary. David? Jessica's voice was shaking. Is this true? David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's not. It wasn't like that. It was a temporary cash flow issue. The investments would have paid off if you hadn't stolen other people's money to make them. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Would you like to see the loan payment I made just this Monday? Or should I show them the mortgage papers? Victoria was staring at David with a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like respect. For me, not him. $350 a month, she repeated slowly. That's over $4,000 a year. For 3 years. While he's been telling you about his family money and his mother's financial success. Jessica stood up abruptly, tears streaming down her face. I need some air. She rushed from the dining room, leaving David sitting there looking like the house of cards he'd built was finally collapsing. Charles broke the awkward silence. David, I think you should go after her. This is your fault, David hissed at me as he stood up. You've ruined everything. No, son. You did that all by yourself. After David left to find Jessica, I turned to Victoria and Charles. I apologize for disrupting your evening. I should go. Wait, Victoria said, standing up as well. Don't apologize, and don't go. Charles, would you give us a moment? Charles nodded and left the dining room, closing the doors behind him. Victoria poured herself another glass of wine and gestured for me to sit back down. How long have you been covering for him? I sank back into my chair. Too long, way too long. And the monthly payments, $647. On what kind of income? Social Security and a part-time job at a craft store. It doesn't leave much for anything else. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in her glass. You know what I see when I look at you. Margaret? I see exactly the kind of woman I'd want in my corner during a crisis. Smart, loyal, and tough as nails. I don't feel very smart right now. Are you kidding? You just saved my daughter from marrying a liar and a thief. That's the smartest thing anyone's done in this house all year. Jessica broke off the engagement that night, right there in the Thorntons' foyer while I was collecting my coat. I heard David's voice through the closed doors, alternating between pleading and anger. But Jessica's response was clear and final. I can't marry someone I don't really know, David, and I don't know you at all. Victoria walked me to my car herself, something I suspected didn't happen often with the family's hired drivers waiting outside. Margaret, I meant what I said in there. You did the right thing. I destroyed my relationship with my son. Your son destroyed his relationship with you the moment he decided his image was more important than your sacrifices. Victoria handed me her business card. I'd like to stay in touch if you don't mind. I have a feeling we have more to talk about. I drove home in a daze, expecting to feel guilty about exposing David's lies. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. The truth was finally out. David didn't call for 2 weeks. When he finally did, his voice was cold and bitter. I hope you're happy, Mom. Jessica won't take my calls. Her family thinks I'm a criminal. My career is essentially over. Your career was built on lies, David. This was inevitable. Was it worth it? Was destroying my life worth proving your point? The question hung between us for a long moment. I didn't destroy your life, son. I just stopped enabling you to destroy mine. He hung up without another word. A few days later, Victoria called. Not texted, not emailed, called personally. Margaret, I've been thinking about our conversation. Do you have time for coffee this week? We met at a small cafe in Manhattan, far removed from the formal elegance of the Thornton estate. Victoria looked different in casual clothes, more approachable, less intimidating. How are you holding up? She asked after we'd ordered. Honestly, better than I expected. It's been hard with David, but also liberating, I guess. I hadn't realized how exhausting it was to keep track of all his lies. Victoria nodded. I've been thinking about what you said about your financial situation. Those monthly payments, they must be challenging on a fixed income. I manage. I'm sure you do. But here's the thing, Margaret. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'd like to make you a proposition. I looked at her curiously. You managed to research loan options across multiple banks, negotiate terms, and create a financial structure that solved a complex crisis, all while working multiple jobs and living on a limited income. That takes serious financial intelligence. I just did what I had to do. Exactly. You solved a complex financial crisis under extreme pressure with limited resources. Do you have any idea how valuable that experience is? Before I could answer, Victoria continued. I've been considering expanding Thornton Industries into financial consulting for middle-income families. People who need real advice, not theoretical investment strategies from advisors who've never struggled to make a budget work. I stared at her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we explore working together. Maybe start with a consulting arrangement, see how it develops. I need someone who understands what financial security means to ordinary people. Someone who's actually lived paycheck to paycheck and found ways to make impossible budgets work. The suggestion was unexpected but not overwhelming. Think about it, Victoria said. But Margaret, you've spent years putting your financial skills to work saving other people. Maybe it's time to put them to work building something for yourself. I spent 2 weeks researching Thornton Industries before calling Victoria back. What I found impressed me and surprised me. The company was profitable, ethical, and run with the kind of long-term thinking that most businesses abandon in pursuit of quarterly gains. I'm interested in exploring this further, I told Victoria when I called her back. But I want to understand exactly what you're proposing. Lunch tomorrow? I'll show you some preliminary ideas I've been developing. The meeting was at Victoria's downtown office, a corner suite with views of the harbor. But Victoria wasn't interested in impressing me with the view. Here's what I've been researching, she said, spreading market analysis reports across the conference table. There's a huge underserved market segment, middle-class families, small business owners, people who need financial planning but can't afford the big investment firms. I studied the reports. The market research was solid, showing clear demand. You want to create a financial consulting service for regular people? I want to explore creating a service that actually helps real people. Your experience managing complex financial challenges on a limited income is exactly the kind of practical expertise this market needs. We spent 2 hours going over market analysis and discussing potential approaches. Victoria had clearly been thinking about this for a while. What would you envision my role being? Initially, consultant and advisor. Help me understand the market, develop our approach, maybe run some pilot programs. If it works out, she paused. Well, we could discuss a more formal partnership down the line. The gradual approach made sense. A trial period would benefit both of us. Victoria, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm 63 with a high school education. Are you sure about this? Margaret, you just described exactly the background I need. Someone who understands regular people's financial challenges because you've lived them. I was about to accept when my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. I should take this, I said apologetically. Mom? David's voice sounded strange, panicked. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you talked to anyone from the SEC lately? My blood went cold. The Securities and Exchange Commission? David, why would they want to talk to me? Because they're investigating my trading activities. They want to know about any family members who might have provided financial backing for my investments. David, you told me you'd cleaned up your act after I bailed you out. I did. This is about something different. Look, if they call you, you need to tell them you never gave me money for investments. The loans you took out, those were personal loans, not investment capital. David, what did you do? Nothing. I mean, nothing illegal. It's complicated, but some of my recent trades are being questioned. And if they think I used family money to artificially inflate my portfolio. Victoria was watching me carefully, clearly hearing David's panicked voice through the phone. David, I can't lie to federal investigators. You're not lying. You didn't give me money for investments. You gave me money to pay debts. What kind of recent trades? Silence. Then, Mom, I might need to borrow some more money. Just temporarily, until this investigation blows over. That's when I realized David hadn't learned anything from his first brush with financial disaster. He was still gambling, still lying, still expecting me to clean up his messes. No, David, I'm done. Mom, you don't understand. If the SEC finds irregularities, I could go to prison. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you broke the law again. I hung up and looked at Victoria, who was sitting very still. I'm sorry you heard that, I said. Don't apologize. But Margaret, if federal investigators want to talk to you about David's activities, you're going to need a good lawyer. I can't afford a good lawyer. Victoria smiled grimly. You can if you're a partner in Thornton Industries. Our legal team is excellent, and they'll make sure you're protected. It wasn't the way I'd expected to accept a business partnership, but sometimes life makes decisions for you. When do we start? The SEC investigators called 3 days later. Victoria's lawyers were with me when I answered their questions, truthfully and completely. Yes, I had loaned my son money to pay gambling debts and stolen client funds. No, I had never provided capital for his investment activities. Yes, I had bank records documenting every transaction. What the investigators told me explained David's panic. He'd been running a complex scheme where he used borrowed money to artificially inflate his trading volume, creating the appearance of success that attracted more clients. When those clients invested with him, he used their money to pay back his earlier debts and fund increasingly risky trades. It was a house of cards that was always going to collapse. The only question was, how many people would get hurt when it did? Your son is looking at federal fraud charges, the lead investigator told me. Wire fraud, securities fraud, possibly money laundering. We're talking about a minimum of 5 years in federal prison. I felt sick, but also strangely relieved. David's lies were finally catching up with him, and this time there was no amount of money I could borrow to save him. The arrest happened 2 weeks later. I saw it on the local news before David's lawyer called me. Federal agents arrested investment advisor David Sullivan this morning on charges of securities fraud and money laundering. I turned off the television and sat in my quiet apartment, trying to process that my son was going to prison. Victoria called that evening. How are you holding up? I keep thinking I should feel worse than I do, I admitted. What kind of mother doesn't fall apart when her son gets arrested? The kind who spent years watching him make the same mistakes over and over again. Margaret, you didn't cause this. You couldn't have prevented it, and you certainly can't fix it. She was right. I'd spent so many years trying to save David from himself that I'd almost forgotten who I was outside of that role. Are you still interested in the partnership? Victoria asked. I'll understand if you need time to... I'm more interested than ever, I said firmly. I'm tired of cleaning up other people's messes. I want to build something positive for a change. We launched Sullivan Thornton Financial Consulting 8 months later, after a successful 6-month pilot program. What started as a consulting arrangement had evolved into a true partnership when our initial clients showed remarkable improvement in their financial situations. Victoria offered me a 30% stake in the new division, more than fair, considering she was providing all the startup capital and infrastructure. Our first official client was a single mother in Queens who worked 2 jobs and needed help creating a budget that would let her save for her daughter's college education. Sitting across from her in our modest downtown office, explaining how to track expenses and identify savings opportunities, I realized this was what I'd been preparing for my entire adult life. Every financial crisis I'd navigated, every impossible budget I'd made work, every sacrifice I'd made to keep our heads above water, it had all been training for this moment. David was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. I wrote him one letter after the sentencing, telling him I loved him, but couldn't continue to enable his destructive choices. I wished him well and told him I hoped he'd use his time in prison to figure out who he wanted to be when he got out. He never wrote back. 2 years later, Sullivan Thornton Financial Consulting has helped over 300 families improve their financial situations. We specialize in what Victoria calls real-world money management, teaching people how to make their dollars stretch, how to plan for emergencies, and how to build security on limited incomes. Victoria and I make an unlikely team. She brings business experience and financial backing. I bring 3 decades of experience making impossible budgets work. Together, we've created something neither of us could have built alone. The best part? Every month when those loan payments automatically deduct from my checking account, $350 that once felt like a crushing burden, I don't feel the old resentment anymore. Those payments represent the price I paid to learn who my son really was, and who I could become when I stopped enabling him. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable ones. And sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to stop saving them from the consequences of their own choices. I'm Margaret Sullivan, and I'm finally living my own life instead of paying for someone else's mistakes. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.